workers want to do their jobs from anywhere while keeping their big city salaries. Here's an article that was published today in the Wall Street Journal, and it outlines something that we've been seeing, especially in the hiring and HR and marketing front, for at least 18 months, at least since March of 2020, when companies really had to respond to the spread of COVID by implementing some sort of work from home initiative. And that was when we saw the lockdowns and things. So this is kind of where the genesis of this argument started. And just to frame the discussion, you have one side of the argument, which is the workers who in April of last year, maybe were sent home to work from home for a period of time. And a lot of individuals use that opportunity to not only work from home, maybe in the cities, but even go back to their home states or their home cities and use it as an opportunity to lower costs and do that. So we have that angle. And of course, that portion of the equation is saying, well, our value to the organization hasn't diminished. The work is still the same. And so we shouldn't be paid any less just as a function of us living somewhere else. Then you have the other side of the argument, which is the organization, which will argue, I think, that there is an intrinsic kind of value that they can place on an employee being in the city or being in kind of the vicinity of the office, coming into the office, and that when people leave the state or when they move to different places, move to the suburbs, move further away, that that they may have a justification for cutting pay or saving some money. So I think the interesting part of this equation isn't actually to look at it from that standpoint. It's to look at it from an employer brand and positioning. But just to frame the argument that, that's what it is at the minute. And I mean, you can definitely see that there are merits and cons to both sides of the argument. But I wanted to raise a couple of points that I think don't get often talked about when we see these kind of headlines or these articles in the news. And hopefully it'll shine a light on a few different places or a few different angles that we can start to include in this equation. And the first is that when I last checked, 25% of the US population is remote or has the opportunity to be remote. And so we're talking really about a not insignificant, but a small section of the US workforce that has the luxury to even have this conversation. There's so many individuals that work in maybe manufacturing shops or in the service sector or different places where they have to go into a physical location every single day. And this isn't even on their agenda. They're not even thinking about this as a conversation. And so us as practitioners in the hiring or HR and marketing space, I think we have to be sensitive to this segment. I think we have to be sensitive to the fact that not everybody has this opportunity. And talking about keeping big salaries the same or things like that, there are definitely justifications for having that argument, but just being aware that not everybody has this opportunity, I think, is important, especially as we talk about kind of having a kind of equal playing field for people and different things like that. The other side, of course, is to think about it from an employer brand standpoint. And that to me is interesting. What an opportunity for companies to really stand out, especially if they are in a position where they're having this discussion, to be advocates for their employees. I mean, one of the big things that often gets discussed, and I'll use kind of millennials to highlight the point, but when we think about millennials and especially millennial professionals and then their kind of motivators, I think one of the big things that we've seen in the last few years is this transition, or at least signaling this transition away from salary being the first thing at the top of the list. And, there's more prevalence, or at least more discussion around what's the company's values, what does the company stand for, and those things being as important or even more important than say pay. And as much as we like to believe that, I think when we have discussions like this, I think it illuminates the fact that, I salary probably is still the most important thing. I had a discussion with a professional the other day, and it definitely kind of checks all the boxes of somebody who is kind of on a growth trajectory, business school grad, maybe trying to get into consulting and things. And we were talking about kind of what her kind of intrinsic motivators are, and there was no denying that where she wanted to end up working was definitely based on salary, 1A almost. And so again, I think when we look at that, the entire demographic, and we say, okay, well, here's 100% of the US working population, and we look at the 25% that has the ability to have this conversation. I think again, we're looking at a small percentage of people who are in roles that allow for this. And again, just going back to the original point, I think we have to be sensitive to the idea that not everybody can have this discussion. And so, just how do we weigh that into the equation? I think it's important to note. But again, kind of jumping around here, but if we jump back to the employer brand as an opportunity, holding that true, so salary isn't the most important thing. Let's say that that's true. Employers have a real opportunity here to showcase the different levers that they can pull from an employer brand or a benefit standpoint that can really help employees who need to, or who have decided to maybe leave the city and work from home somewhere else, and say, okay, fine, let's make this work, and how can we make this work? And so if the argument is still there that the salaries and things are going to be a contentious point, well, what other benefits, what other things can companies do to provide support to a remote workforce that signals to them, hey, look, we still care, we still need the labor, we still need your expertise and your services, and how do we tap into other things that are important? So a couple of things that are coming to mind right now, I'd say, are professional development and other levels of support. I mean, those are things that have never really required companies to be in person, or workforces to be in person, to tap into. And maybe companies can start to really push those initiatives through their internal comms teams to make an impact. And again, what a differentiator, or what an opportunity for companies who maybe haven't had the opportunity in the last few years to compete at like a salary level for their employer brand. Maybe their balance sheets aren't as strong as the kind of the big tech firms or something. To say, hey, look, okay, let's try to compete on salary, but look at all these other things that we can do to appeal to your sensibilities, to appeal to the things that matter to you as a remote worker, while ensuring that it's a win-win for both organizations, or both sides of the equation. Sorry. It's just an interesting discussion. I think we're going to continue to see it. It's usually the case with money and salaries and things. I think something that we all know is that life is expensive, and so salary is always going to be up there. But instead of getting caught in the weeds here and seeing all these headlines and starting to say, okay, well, this is maybe the end all be all. This is the most important thing that's going on in the HR space, or the employer brand space. Not to get distracted and really look at these times and this chaos and this kind of disruption in the space as an opportunity. And I think that's where kind of the next generation of companies are really going to be able to stand out going forward.